know the diet was causing these problems, and yet you still double down, triple down, went the juicing route. You were trying so hard to heal.
I've been told by this doctor, you're going to heal using this juicing method. The vegan diet's the best for your health. It has to be. It cannot ever be the diet. There must be something on. My mental state was in a terrible, terrible shape. I was full of anxiety. I kept searching and searching and doing more blood work. I now know that was because of the way I was eating. And I remember searching one day, can plants be harmful to you?
It's a whole nother world that got opened up to you about what actual, true, healthful nutrition should look like, and all those dangers that are involved in consuming excess oxalate, which so many people do when they go that juicing route.
We all should know by now how important it is to get in enough protein. I talk about this all the time. An excellent way to add in some additional animal-based protein with a full amino acid profile is with Equip Prime Protein. This is the one I love. This is the one I recommend. Every scoop has 4 ounces of super collagenous grass-fed beef. Use the code the Carnitarian and you'll get 15% off your first order over at Equip Food.
Hey, everybody. Today on the channel, I'm so pleased we have James Lehman, aka the Carnivorist. He is an ex-vegetarian, ex-vegan, ex-pescatarian turned carnivore, host of the popular YouTube podcast called Carnivorist Chats, where he has conversations with some of the space's most incredible researchers, doctors, and thought leaders. James shares his journey from where his health declined to now his amazing recovery. James, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the channel.
Linda, I am so pleased to be here. I can't even tell you. It was an honor and a privilege to have you on Carnivorist Chats, and I'm so glad that I get to come on your channel and for your listeners to share my own journey. So thank you for having me.
So let's start. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with your background. You've tried a few different ways of eating. What was the motivation, first off, to try veganism, vegetarianism, pescatarianism? Where did that come from?
Love to start at the beginning. I always say it's the best place, right? Let me tell your listeners a little bit of my journey, and I'll keep it as brief as possible because I love to spin a yarn, Linda, so we can get into it. But I was born and raised in the beautiful island of Bermuda. I'm coming to you here today for your listeners. That's where I'm coming to you from. Wonderful place to be raised. I am a child of the 70s. So I was born in 1972. And as you can imagine, that was right around the time those good old US dietary guidelines were coming out. And the vilification of saturated fat and the low fat movement really had kicked into high gear. So I'll paint that backdrop for you right there to begin.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to let your listeners know, and you know, Linda, that my mom is a vegetarian and she always has been and continues to this day. I've tried many times since she's seen my miraculous recovery in my health to convince her to add animal foods back. Well, being a vegetarian, she does include some cheeses, but she doesn't eat any fish or meat or of any type. So there was that influence in the home growing up. So you combine the low fat, I watched as butter transitioned out of our house and margarine was added, and a lot of the saturated fat vilification was in full swing. And so that impacted my health as a child. As it turns out, I became quite heavy as a young boy, and I'm going back to my early teen years and in school here. And I was quite a bit overweight. I was teased, unfortunately, a little bit in school, and then ended up being sent away to boarding school. My father's Canadian. Now, my father's always included meats in his diet, and that was a blessing looking back on it now because he would cook us hamburgers and some red meat from time to time on the grill outside because my mom didn't want it cooked in the house. But that kept some meat in our diet. I, of course, grew up with a lot of processed foods. You think back to now the 70s and early 80s when I was a young boy, things like cereal in the morning, Pop Tarts, all that fun stuff, multi-grain toast with margarine and sugar on top. You just name it. It was part of, and that obviously contributed to my weight gain. So fast forward a little bit, I was sent away to boarding school in Canada at 15 years old, 14 years old. And in boarding school, you don't have a choice of what you're being fed. You're fed what's given to you in the dining hall. So, which was again fortuitous at the time because we had a Hungarian chef in Canada, and meat became a big part of our diets there. He was famous for his Hungarian goulash and stews and meats because of the cold Canadian winters we were facing. And I actually started to shed weight because exercise was really heavily part of our routine at boarding school. I got into basketball, I got into rowing crew, which was an amazingly challenging in terms of effort sport for those who have never seen it. I mean, you just expend so much energy in a crew boat. I was in an eight man boat, and I got into great shape. So much so that I was touted to play basketball for university, the rowing team as well as I transitioned into university. And I ended up separating my shoulder, which sort of put the stop to all of that in university. And around that time, and I'm going to pause here for you to ask some more questions, Linda, I ended up dating a young lady at the time who was vegetarian. So we're going back now to the late 80s, early 90s. And I often tell this story is that I was looking back, I'm quite in admiration of that because there wasn't a lot of options out there at that time. So as one does when you're dating, you tend to gravitate towards what the other person is doing because it's just easy in terms of grocery shopping, living together in university and things like that. And I sort of adopted that vegetarian diet. So I'll pause there for you.
Mm. So, with the vegetarian background and now having this vegetarian girlfriend, you sort of bought into it hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. Vegetarianism as being the likely most healthy thing. I mean, is that where your mind sort of then sat, even after you were in, great shape, eating meat based with school, you switched. So, what did you believe about veganism at that time that led you to go forward with that path?
Great question. I will put a pin in the vegan side because that doesn't happen for quite a few more years. I was essentially just doing that diet because it was convenient, the vegetarian at that time. And I want to just highlight for your listeners and also for you, I oscillated between a vegetarian diet and then a pescatarian style diet as the years moved on. For in fact, for over 10 years, I was back and forth because um, I got fast forward a little bit. I graduated university, came back to Bermuda, got in the working world. I continued on a little bit with the vegetarian diet, but because Bermuda, I'm just spoiled with the choice of fish we get here, the freshest fish in the world. You think about, we just have to go offshore, get fresh
Mm.
tuna, fresh snapper, fresh wahoo, whatever it is there. And of course, the sushi craze was going full swing back in the 90s when it really kicked off here. And so I added some fish back in. I oscillated, took it out, but I certainly wasn't eating any red meat, chicken, turkey, anything of that nature during this period after university when I came back. As it turns out, that young lady and I finished our dating in our university years. She ultimately went on to become a veterinarian, which shows you she's very caring toward animals, which is great. And I understand to this day she still continues to be vegetarian. I just ran into her sister some time ago and we caught up. Now, the vegan thing started in around 2014 for me. So this is fast forwarding quite a few years on oscillating between vegetarian and pescatarian diet. And the reason why I went vegan was because I had taken a look at my health. My health started to get really bad on a vegetarian, excuse me, and pescatarian diet. I actually started to have a lot of challenges health wise. I was gaining a lot of weight again. Again, being in the working world, it was very easy to knock off on a Friday, go have a few beers with the boys, eat a lot of processed stuff. Because if you think about the offerings, it's a lot of grains. I mean, hey, chips are vegetarian and they're easy to just get at. And I ended up putting on a lot of weight, clearly had become metabolically unhealthy. For the listeners who want to see some photos of my vegetarian days, I have it on my Instagram. But I ended up really becoming quite sick to the point where I had a few episodes in hospital stays where I was passing out. I split my head open. You can't really see it on this side, I believe, but I fell down some stairs, gave myself a concussion. I started to get a lot of headaches. I started to uh, just really feel not so great. And the impetus to start the vegan diet came after coming across some of the vegan propaganda films online and touting the health benefits. So I'll also just say forks over knives, cowspiracy, and to a great extent, it just pains me to say it now, Linda, game changers. And I'll leave.
Oh, wow. Those are some. That's some heavy propaganda, but you know what, James? You're not the only one who fell into those traps. I mean, those are very popular films. They really are, and a lot of people are highly convinced that eating meat, especially red meat, is the absolute worst thing that they can do for their health. And I mean, so it's not that, uh, it's not like I can't understand why you would believe those things and why now you've sort of in a way you doubled down on vegetarianism, pescatarianism by going even further deeper into the vegetables and headed into veganism. So then I'm going to ask you this. I know the answer, but did that save you? No, it did not. So tell us what happened once you made that switch.
Sure, love to. And let me just preface what I'm about to say for your listeners in that, as with a lot of people that go from a highly ultra processed food, even if it's vegetarian background like I did, and then into a really strict plant based whole foods approach, you do feel better for a while. And I did lose weight and I did feel good for the first couple of years on the diet. And that seems to be what is the case for many people that I've interviewed on my own podcast and spoken with, Linda.
Mhm.
And I now know, looking back, it's because I eliminated all that garbage that I had been eating. I also, as one naturally does when they start feeling better, started incorporating more exercise, stopped drinking as much. I was drinking a lot during those days, alcohol, and all these things contributed to me feeling better. It was about the fifth year of the vegan diet, and I just need to also let people know that I was completely strict the whole time. There was none of this Chegan stuff. I did not cheat. I did not cheat.
Hard. It's not like you didn't do it hard enough.
Correct. Albeit the vegans now are telling me that I obviously did not do it hard enough and I was doing it all wrong. However, we'll get into that in a little bit. I ate whole foods, plant based, all the best local fruits, seasonal vegetables and fruits. And yes, my health went off a cliff in the fifth year and continued to get worse after the fifth year till the seventh year when I absolutely had to stop. So I'll stop there because I know I'm sure you have some questions.
I mean, that is a long time to spend deteriorating, to be honest. How is it that you were so locked in? I mean, do you feel like what were the forces keeping you locked into that even as you deteriorated between 5, year 5 and year 7? What was keeping you so attached to that paradigm?
Excellent question, Linda, because everything that you are sort of, and I hate to use this, but I've used this word before, and many ex vegans talk about it. The indoctrination into this way of eating is very compelling. And I understand why people do it because I did the old Google search, what's the healthiest diet for you? And up pops these reams of things saying plant based vegan diet's the best for you, it's the best for the planet, it's the best for the environment. And you watch these propaganda pieces, and you're, of course, very saddened by the state of these videos. Like, you don't like to watch these animals being abused, but we have to understand these are sometimes people doing this for the camera and being filmed on purpose. There is that fact. And you and I know there are instances where we need to improve animal welfare. There is no doubt about that. But these films talking about, especially the game changers, and I've talked to Jane Buxton about this, the author of the Great Plant Based Con, and she saw that, and that's what compelled her to write her book, The Great Plant Based Con. She especially was worried about young women who were seemingly really coming in droves over to the vegan diet because of a lot of this stuff saying, you'll lose weight, you'll feel great, you'll be healthier. So when my health started to fail me, and it really started to fail me, Linda, and I don't mince words here, I became so incapacitated. I wasn't able to do my job correctly. I was mentally unwell. I was physically unwell. I was dropping weight at a tremendous rate, no matter how much I put in my mouth. I was just losing weight constantly. I had brain fog. I had bleeding gums. I had bleeding from my bowels. I was severely emaciated, full of riddled with pain to the point where I could hardly get out of bed. I was getting headaches. I was felt like I was getting early onset Alzheimer's or dementia because I could not remember what I was doing. I used to be at work typing on the keyboard, and I literally 5 minutes later going, "What am I doing? Is this my? Why am I here?" And my skin was cracking, my nails were cracking. I literally looked like walking death. I had my friend stopping me, going, "James, are you okay physically? You're not looking or sounding healthy." I remember This was all around the time of COVID, Linda. So I had literally been flown away the December before COVID in February or March 2020 when everything sort of went crazy, um, and was so sick. I went into emergency in the United States. They did a CT scan on my abdomen because I thought I may have had cancer. They discovered I had a severe bacterial infection in there, amongst other things, some autoimmune issues. I remember as a vegan, sort of at the last couple of years there, my thyroid was so far out of whack. And anyhow, ended up coming back. COVID hit the hospital, the small hospital we had here locked down. So they really kept it open for emergency purposes, especially as the COVID cases increased here on the island. So it was incumbent on me to try and figure out what the heck was going on. I did virtual visits with my GP, and we were constantly, I felt like a human pincushion running blood tests on antibodies for this, antibodies for that. And please forgive me, I'm just going to go on here for the last part before I allow you the next question. You said something as you asked me this question, Linda, and that was, James, why did you double down on this? Why did you feel that you had to go harder? Because that is the narrative that is out there in that space, the dogma in the vegan diet. If it's failing you, it's not the diet's fault, it's your fault. And that's something I really have to impress upon people. Hey, if you're thriving and you're doing wonderful and you feel great, your blood works great, you have energy, your sexual health's good, your mental health's good, who am I to tell you to do anything different? However, if you're doing this and you're not feeling well in any form, and but you're still trudging on, you have to ask yourself why. Why are you doing this? And it took me too long. And I do this, and I sound a bit on a soapbox now, Linda, but please, I want to get across this point is I want to help people not get to the stage I did. I literally, as we talked about in our own episode, my testosterone was in the toilet. I was so sick. I don't want anyone to get to that stage where I was at. And I was literally laying there in my bed. COVID was on, lost my job, lost my insurance, really praying to be taken out of my misery. And I came across this doctor. The final stage was I came across this doctor who was espousing juicing. So I had heard that juicing was the way to go for 3 meals a day: spinach, kale, chia seeds, almond milk, and some fruit, all blended up in a smoothie, and just downing these 3 times a day. And that's your diet. And I kid you not, it nearly killed me, Linda, because not only did I feel worse, you would think with all that fiber that I would be going to the bathroom 10 times a day. I became severely constipated. My pain was real. I was waking up through the night. I hardly slept for almost a year, literally maybe an hour a night. So you can imagine. I was waking up with such severe pain and fibromyalgia. I couldn't sleep. It was just a desperate situation. And I'll pause there.
I mean, I cannot say how horrible this all sounds. It just sounds terrible to me. And the fact that you like I have to wonder, did you know the diet was causing these problems and yet you still double down, triple down, went the juicing route? You were trying so hard to heal. But do you think that the diet kept you from being able to rationally think about how you could move forward more positively and get your health back? I feel like once you're in the depths of that kind of sickness that you're describing, it must be so hard to have your wits about you and think to yourself rationally, the diet is doing this. I shouldn't be doubling down. I should be reversing out of this.
Great, great question. And absolutely, there is a component to that. I would say that my mental state, as you correctly alluded to, Linda, was in a terrible, terrible shape. And we talked about it a bit on my own podcast. I was full of anxiety, not only because I was scared to death about what was happening to me and I couldn't control it. I thought, well, why is this going so wrong? I've been told by this doctor, you're going to heal using this juicing method. The vegan diet's the best for your health. It has to be. It cannot ever be the diet. There must be something
Mm.
else going on. I kept searching and searching and doing more blood work, and yeah, I had some other things going on, but I now know that was because of the way I was eating. And my mental state was, just looking back on it now, it was horrific. I was depressed. I was anxious. And it eventually came to the point where I had a couple of choices. I could continue on, and as I said to you, not only was I praying to be taken out of my misery, but more than likely, I would have been taken out of my misery, because I just did not foresee a way out. I was really, really in bad shape. It was suggested to me, and this is ironic. I often tell people So, hey, because there was nothing else going on for me. I was lying in bed every day, tried to do a few things, but I would get exhausted so easily. I literally could not do too much exercise or otherwise. And it was suggested to me, well, why don't you listen to podcasts, as a way to pass the time? And I remember searching one day, can plants be harmful to you? Because I had really exhausted everything. I had exhausted my can plants be beneficial to you searches, and it had clearly hadn't worked for me. So I started to search, can plants harm you in any way? And I came across, and this is I say divine intervention, and my angel, Sally Norton, as you know, I came across a YouTube presentation that's still up there today, Lost Seasonality and the Overconsumption of Plants, that Sally did in 2017. And I watched it, and I must have watched it like 50 times, Linda, because I could not, I was like, in my brain fog state, I was going, wait, 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 wait. So plants are actually not the best thing for you if you have my condition, or can harm you in some way. I just couldn't understand it. And from there, I did a deep dive. I was like, okay. And I heard Sally in a couple of other presentations. I researched her after that because I just loved the way she articulated things. Her talking about that animal foods are innately low in this plant toxin called oxalates. And I'm like, dang. So you're telling me I've kind of been misled down this path. So let me start this research and let me start even considering adding animal foods back in my diet.
It's a whole nother world that got opened up to you about what actual, true, healthful nutrition should look like, and all those dangers that are involved in consuming excess oxalate, which so many people do when they go that juicing route. It's almost impossible to not overload on oxalate if you're juicing. How much spinach do you have to juice to get just, a glass of a smoothie or something like that? So once that door was opened and once you started learning more about oxalate specifically, about the dangers of a plant-based diet, how did you then sort of admit to yourself, I've been wrong, and then start eating meat again? How did that change your mental state? And, some people talk about they feel like a little light switch got turned on, that their brain, like it started to reboot, and they feel finally like they can think clearly again. Did that happen for you?
100% it did. And I know there's a lot of anecdotal stories out there about this is the exact case, but it sure did for me, Linda, because I was like, okay, you have to understand at this point, there was a lot of cognitive dissonance with me adding animal foods back in after 7 years and being completely strict. And as I talked about watching those propaganda pieces, but I was like, I do not want to be on this planet anymore. I want to survive. And not only do I want to survive, I want to get back to the health that I think that I should have in my late 40s at this stage, about to turn 50. Why am I feeling like this? I feel like absolute death. And so I chose for me the most recently known thing to me, because if we go back to my story and in my vegetarian slash pescatarian days and eating some fish, the last stage before I went fully vegan, I was eating fish again at that stage. And so I added fish back in as the first thing that I chose because it was the most, let's just say, the easiest thing for me to incorporate. And I remember to this day, it was COVID. I had a little tiny Weber grill outside, one of the tabletop ones, and I took some salmon and I grilled it up and I ate it. And I remember taking that first bite, going, "Here we go, James." And I literally kid you not, it wasn't instantaneous, but a few hours later, I was like, wow, I kind of feel something here. Like something's clicking. My body's going, wow. And hindsight, as they say, is 2020. But at the end stages of that vegan diet, my body was craving so much fat, Linda. I was literally going into the jars of coconut manna, which is the fat from coconuts, and eating them by the jar because my body was screaming to me, you need some good fat. You've been so low fat for so long. Not only do you have any hormones, but so having some fatty salmon really was like, oh, this is what I've been missing. And we'll get into how I had to go very slowly and the mistakes that I made.
Mm.
But it took me a while. I want your listeners to understand it took me a while to incorporate specifically red meat back in my diet. And I'll let you know why a little later on.
I mean, the story is not unfamiliar, right? We've heard these stories, and I wish we could hear more of vegans turned meat eaters, because there's that narrative out there that, you know, you're going to be fine. This is absolutely healthful. But on the flip side, we know that if you're not getting in those healthy fats, your brain it will just not function properly. And if you're not getting in that animal protein, you will be robbing your body of its protein sources to get that protein. So you'll experience um, bone density loss. You'll experience muscle loss because your body will rob from itself what it needs. I'm so happy you made this switch. I mean, if you could go back in time and say, what were the earliest red flags that maybe somebody then wouldn't want to wait 5 years until they were in such a state like you. They could tell early on, what are the early signs of, like, vegan deficiency or vegetarian deficiency that you would tell people, "This is what you should look for in the beginning. Don't get to the spot where I was."
Great question. The very first thing that I should have gone back in hindsight is one I alluded to earlier when I was sitting at work and I was literally starting to forget things. The brain fog that developed from, I would say, that fifth year. It was definitely the fifth year that I really started to notice that and started to get increasingly worse. It became unrelenting to the point where as I said, I thought I had early onset dementia or Alzheimer's. I was really scared. I was like, okay, why am I not thinking clearly? And you alluded to it as well. The importance of the fats and the B12 that was missing. I did supplement B12, but of course it was a vegan form of B12 and not helping, because we know with a lot of these vitamins, especially the Bs, they like to come in a preformed, it's the best to eat it in a whole foods form rather than a supplement. Albeit supplementation, as we know, a lot of the vegans say, well, you didn't supplement the proper form of B12, or you didn't supplement the proper form. Any diet that you have to supplement to that extent is deficient, and
It's not a sustainable diet, right?
it is not. And I know there's a ton of arguments from the vegans, and we'll get into how they've gone since I've come out sort of saying that I've been a vegan and now I'm a mostly animal based carnivore. But it should have been one of the first things that I noticed. But then I also should have noticed my gums started to bleed a lot more. My skin and nails were cracking, and then my digestion was never good. I mean, at the beginning, yeah, sure, it was okay, but then the bloating, the constipation, despite the massive amounts of fiber that I had, um, I should have said to myself, "Yeah, these are the warning signs." And I wish I could go back, but I think that this journey for sure for me, Linda, was one that and we'll talk about why I started my podcast, but why I'm so delighted to share my story, just in the hopes that someone else doesn't have to go through with it. As I say, if you feel that that way of eating is not serving you.
Right. Now, tell me a little bit about that backlash from the vegan community. I mean, I'm sure you had many contacts that were vegan, vegetarian. They were rooting you on, telling you, James, you're going to be fine. Just do this. Just do a little bit more of this. And then when you, like you say, came out as now I'm eating meat again, what was that like for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I will say, as a vegan, I was never a pushy vegan. I was never on the social media space. I've only more recently got in the social media space since I've become carnivore. However, my Facebook page, my personal page there, I was always extolling the virtues of the vegan diet, much to the dismay of some of my friends who were like, "Oh my gosh, if I see one more vegan post from this guy, when I traveled, I ate the vegan diet." It's only since I've joined on social media as a carnivore that, of course, when I'm showing my before and after pictures and explaining my story like I am here, the pushback has been insane. Specifically on Twitter, X, it's just a fighting platform over there, free speech and all that. So I was not prepared earlier on, but I'm prepared now. But, oh, you must be lying. There's no way you didn't do it correctly. You are a grifter. I just can't
Mhm.
stand that word. I've been called all kinds of names, because what they can't stand is that someone that has left that way and is outside saying, there's another way and this might not be the best way. And I feel for them. I really do, because some are so, for lack of a better word, indoctrinated, and so have their mindset and confused about what's going on, and so involved in the propaganda that it just becomes your life. And for a while there, it really did become my life. There was, as I say, I was talking about it, I was living it, I was traveling for it. My view is softened a little bit. We can get into my view later on about the carnivore diet and some dogma creeping in this space too a little bit. And you've made some adjustments. I've made some adjustments, but yeah, yeah, it's a tough space to be in. And I will finish by saying that I am always so thankful for those folks that have reached out to me. And there's been a number, Linda, since I've started this way that have been vegan who have said, James, I listened to your podcast. It convinced me to add animal foods back in, and I can't tell you what a difference it's made in my life. So that type of thing keeps me going. It really does, knowing that I've at least helped someone get back
Yeah.
their health.
It's incredible because so many people can seriously be damaged with long-term permanent damage. Are you dealing with anything that's long-term that you've not been able to resolve now that you've switched?
Wow, there's definitely some ongoing things. As you talked about and I talked about earlier, these wonderful things called oxalates, they do not leave your body easily. And when they do, they go out kicking and screaming. It is not an easy process. So listeners need to understand that oxalate accumulates in the body. So the body looks at these crystals. They're literally shards of glass, like crystals that plants use to defend themselves. They're very concentrated in seeds, nuts. Think those type of things. High seeds, nuts. They protect their seeds. And I ate a ton of the highest stuff. So just to give your listeners some examples, almonds very high, most of the nuts very high. So almond, as we call it, water. Oh my goodness, the bioavailable form of oxalates in almond water, because I won't call it milk as I used to. Things like beets, chocolate, because oh my goodness, we had a ton of chocolate as a vegan because dark chocolate is vegan, but dark chocolate very high. Sweet potatoes, massive, and I was
Mhm.
huge into sweet potatoes because what grows exceptionally well here in Bermuda, yams or sweet potatoes, beets. We get a ton of those, and so when you ingest all that, the body can handle a certain amount. And we'll talk about low oxalate eating and why it's important for me now. And that's another just sort of caveat into some long-term effects. But so it accumulates in your body till your body goes, okay, you've stopped eating the ton that you were before. We can sort of start to expel or release those that we've been storing. Some of the favorite haunts for oxalate in the body are the fascia and the tissues, which explains why so many people, including myself, had fibromyalgia, neck pain, thyroid disorders. It loves the thyroid oxalate, just loves it. And again, thanks to Sally Norton, Monique Attinger for their work in this area because it's led me to so many aha moments. And so, long term things that I'm dealing with, oxalate dumping. And that's what we affectionately call it when the body starts to expel the oxalates. There's only a couple of ways it can come out through your sweat, come out through your kidneys and your urine, it can come out through your skin and through your stool. Some people are more predispositioned for one way versus the other. Obviously, if it comes out in your urine, you have to be very careful of kidney stones, and many people know that. It can come out through your stool. Dairy can be a big help as you dump oxalate in the beginning because calcium binds onto oxalate. It can come out through your skin. People have taken photos of literally crystals on their skin coming out through the eyes. People have had crystals coming out through their eyes. Another issue I'd like to talk about is, Linda, is one that can happen for many, many folks. In fact, when I interviewed Lierre Keith, author of The Vegetarian Myth, all you folks who haven't read that book, go read that book. It's an
Absolutely.
amazing book. Is I had some severe, and again, looking back, gallbladder issues on the vegan diet to the point where I developed cysts in there, which also can be caused by oxalates. And I had bile insufficiency, I had pancreatic insufficiency, and specifically low stomach acid because your stomach stops producing the acid necessarily to digest meat when you don't eat it for a while. So when that happens and you try and reintroduce meat, a lot of people struggle. A lot of loose stools, undigested food. I had a ton of non-digested food in the last sort of days of my vegan diet, years even. And so I now have to take betaine HCl with every meal to get my stomach acid up to help me. Luckily, you start high and then start to lower as your stomach produces acid again. But also, I know that my gallbladder has sluggish bile. There's sludgy bile in there. I had an ultrasound done a number of times and showed the cysts and also the sludgy bile. And those are the main things for me. All my other issues resolved. My skin cracking, my nails cracking, my hair falling out, the brain fog, weight gain, putting on muscles so much more easily now. All those things resolve, but there are some long-term consequences. Lier talks about her bone density as a female. She struggles now. Like, it's unbelievable. I am sure, I have not done a bone density scan in some time, that I would be deficient. And my hormone deficiency also resolved too. But yeah, that's sort of the it in a synopsis for you there.
It's great that you are able now to recognize the damage that all of that oxalate has done. And I'm sorry you're dealing with these long term consequences. Better late than never, I suppose. But now you can't, let's explain to everybody, you can't just go no oxalate, right? If you have been living with a high oxalate diet for such a long time, would you just run down what happens if you go no oxalate and you decide, well, it's so terrible for me, I'm just going to cut it out? You had an experience with no oxalate. And so explain to people how that goes.
Yeah, this is a super important point, Linda, for those folks that have come from a very high oxalate background. In fact, when Monique and I were talking to one another, she goes, "Well, James, give me an example of what you used to eat." And I said, "Well, here, here's an example." And she's like, "Oh my, that's even higher than I was." I'm like, "Yeah, I bombed myself with oxalate." And here's the nuance to it. I, of course, being the stubborn male that I am, thought, once I discovered that these plants were literally destroying my health and my life, in so many ways, I was like, right, they're all out. I'm done. I'm going to start the carnivore diet 100%, just all meats. And I had what's affectionately known as the honeymoon period as you begin, because your body's like, oh, thank you. Thank you for stopping. Hallelujah. Let's start repair, and we're now getting the nutrition that we need. For me, that honeymoon period lasted about 3 months. Then 3 months in, all of a sudden, I never forget it. I woke up one night with pain again. I had like sort of that fibromyalgia pain, arthritic pain coming back. And I was like, oh no, please don't say this is happening again. And then stomach aches returned, stool that was getting worsened. And I was like, no, please. Everything was working so well. It's to the point where, Linda, I reached out to Sally Norton on Instagram, God bless her. And she had the kindness to reply to me. I was like, Sally, what is going on here? I've gone low ox or no ox, and I'm not feeling very well. And she's like, whoa, whoa, tell me what you're eating. Are you eating any oxalate? I'm like, No. She's like, okay, you have got to get some back in there, because the body has begun this dumping process, and it can be very dangerous for folks. And this is not a point that needs to be, um, excuse me, needs to be talked about more. You have to keep a small amount of oxalate in for sometimes many years, Linda. Sally is on her ninth or 10th year now, and she's resolved pretty much every issue that she had, but she still keeps some low ox stuff in there, as do many others. And it's an important nuance for those of us that have come from a high oxalate, especially vegan background, because some people end up quitting carnivore because they feel worse and are not understanding why they do. So, what this keeping that oxalate in, and I chose to include fruits. I chose to include some low to medium blueberries, and at the time, local bananas. And bananas can be high ox or medium ox, depending on their ripeness, depending on the type of banana. It's very nuanced. But from the time that I started doing that, I was like, oh my goodness, I feel better. This
Mm.
is working. And one would think that conventional wisdom and many other people talk about, it's the carbohydrate reintroduction, but I know it wasn't. It is the introduction of oxalates. Now, many people have felt the same by adding vegetables back in, but I'll be honest, vegetables and we don't get along, and I just no,
Same.
not
Not
again.
for yeah.
I tell folks that ask me, especially servers in restaurants, "No vegetables, no sides?" I'm like, "If you understood how many vegetables I ate, it was enough for 2 lifetimes, so I don't need any more, thanks." So yeah, that is the nuance, and it's an important one, the oxalate dumping, slowing it down. Some people liken it to, trying to get to an oasis in the desert. You're crawling between times, and over time, that period shortens. So as your body starts expelling or excreting, the length of time between the dumpings gets shorter, and then they get less severe. So it's a very nuanced discussion. So I thank you for asking that.
Mm. I wonder, I have never done strict carnivore where it's just meat and water. I have always still allowed spices in my switch from, I think, what was a pretty high oxalate diet to what I hadn't even considered that I was still keeping in some oxalate. And I don't think I ever experienced any harsh oxalate dumping? Because as you've been talking, I've been thinking to myself, did I go through this? And I know I was eating a ton of spinach, and I can't point to any, times where I was like, this is terrible oxalate dumping. Absolutely, I have experienced crystals coming through my skin, but nothing too extreme. And I wonder if it's because I have always kept some spices in my diet. Now that you're doing more of like a low oxalate, I'd love to get into what you're doing in terms of protein because you had gotten down to such a low weight. And when people go back and if they look at your social media, they will see you very slim, and they will see you now and say, "This is like a gym bro." You've put on, I think, is it 50 pounds of mass, and it does not look like you've gained 50 pounds of fat, sir. It's absolutely muscle. So, what is a typical day of eating like for you? And how do you balance your how do you balance your fats, your proteins with the small amount of carbohydrate that you're having? What are you doing now?
Super fun. Love this question. And let me just love this conversation, Linda. Thank you again. Let me just touch on what you started on in the beginning. I absolutely think that is correct, that your addition of the spices early on probably saved you a lot of heartache and body aches in the dumping process. Some very high, just before we move on to the important question of my diet, um, some very high spices are black pepper, and people don't realize that black pepper is a very high. So an easy substitution is white pepper. White pepper is low oxalate. So if you go into my kitchen right now, you'll see white pepper. I've kind of reintroduced along the lines some of the lower oxalate spices back in, and I'm happy to say that they're causing me no ill effect. Another one that people, especially the vegans, like to tout on is turmeric.
Mm.
Turmeric is super high, but yet the version of the more processed version of turmeric, curcumin, is low oxalate. So it's an easy substitution. And again, folks, go back to Sally's book, Toxic Superfood. She gives you a bunch of substitutions. Listen to Monique Attinger, her top 10 dirty dozen or top 12 dirty dozen list. And she offers substitutions on those the high oxalate ones if you have a particular love for something that you just can't give up. In regards to my diet, yes, you're absolutely right. At my lowest weight, and this is sad for me to say, I went down to 127 pounds at 6'2", and
Oh,
I was rail thin. I looked bony. I mean, even those pictures were on my trajectory downwards that I put up. I was about 130 in those pictures, but 127, 126 pounds, and yeah, it was not fun. I was actually, I think my waist size was 28 inches, and I was going to the store to buy kids' underwear because my men's underwear was falling off me. Then that was my bottom. I was just like, "What is going on here, James?" So we talked about my slow introduction of protein, and this is a good juncture to talk about me exercising as a vegan versus exercising now. I see a lot of vegan fitness people online saying you can clearly bulk up on a vegan diet. Yes, it is. It is possible. I will say that my recovery time is a lot better on carnivore. I can exercise less often on carnivore, but get the same results as a vegan. I was exercising every single day just to try and maintain muscle mass, and I was in pain the next day. Some days it was like, just I shouldn't have done it. I, through my weight gain, just realized that as Dr. Baker told me early on, because I joined Dr. Baker's Rivero community early on. He said, I was like, Dr. Baker, I need to put on some weight. How am I going to do this? He's like, James, you have to eat like it's your job. Prioritize the protein and just pack it in. And that's what I did. My diet has changed. I'm still tinkering with everything now, just because I just love to see how I can optimize my health. It's still fundamental carnivore, animal based, with a few low oxalate fruits and a coffee like you, Linda. But I just had to eat more. I did start out trying to eat higher fat, but because of my gallbladder issues, and I was pretty stubborn, I went a long time just trying the higher fat. I have since now moved to a little bit more lower fat approach, and it's working very well for me. I started eating 3 times, 2 times a day. I did 2 MAD early on. Then I added a third meal to 3 MAD, which was really good. And as you heard earlier on, I included a lot of dairy at the beginning stages. Dairy and that was a very good thing for me because Dairy, not only, as you know, is an easy way to gain weight,
Yep.
because not only that, but it's absolutely delicious and it's an easy transition into carnivore. And I forgot how much I love cheese and milk. But more recently, I've eliminated dairy because I realized after a while it wasn't serving me the best, but it did help early on, especially as I oxalate dumped heavy. Because as I talked about earlier, dairy can help bind up with its calcium as it moves through your stool. And I happen to be one that excretes a lot through my stool, oxalates. Now I am mostly a two mad, higher protein, sort of lower fat-ish approach for my gallbladder, and it's serving me very, very well. A typical day of eating is I start out with 4 eggs. I post them in my stories and Instagram. I keep very honest to what I post up there. 4 eggs, beef, bacon, and two 80-20 at the moment, or if I can get them 90-10 burger patties that I make myself, hand patties. And I add a little bit ghee on the top on my burgers, and then in the evenings is where I kind of have my fun. I do chicken wings or I'll throw some seafood in there, but always steak of some sort with my meal. And yes, I can do my ribeye, but I always know the next day, yeah, I ate a little bit too much on the fatty side. So I mostly eat a lot of strip and some leaner cuts. But yeah, working very well. And the weight gain was not overnight, which is a much healthier way to gain the weight rather than, as you
Mhm.
know, the opposite where you're putting on a lot of fat. This was lean muscle mass. As I've said, I just couldn't believe how much my energy went through the roof as I added animal foods back into my diet and my digestion improved. And so you want to exercise again. I started a little home gym and that's all I do. I go for weighted walks 3 times a week and I exercise at home 2 or 3 times a week in my little home gym. And that's all I do. And yeah, I'm up to 180 plus pounds now from 127, and it's definitely mostly muscle.
Incredible. I mean, I can't imagine how much more enjoyable your workouts are now than versus before, where you were really just struggling. Even if you're getting in the vegan protein, like they recommend, well, if you want to gain muscle, vegan protein is there for you. There's lots of protein in broccoli, right? I mean, what a struggle that must have been to try and gain and do the things and to be counting grams of protein, even that are vegetable proteins. It's so pointless because it is not the bioavailable protein. It's not exactly what's on the nutrition label. You're not getting what's on the label. You're not getting anywhere near the amount of protein that's on the label because you can't absorb that kind of protein. So I think that people should absolutely go and check out your photos because the change in you is really quite extreme. And I'm sure you were just so much happier in the gym when you started seeing these results. I'm sure that made you say, I'm absolutely doing the right thing here.
Even if I hadn't seen the results in my body, Linda, I have to be honest, which it's clear I did. Yes, it made me happy. It was the mental thing for me that I just was like, I have got my brain back. I can have conversations. I can remember things. Yes, putting on weight was a big deal to me. And it came on just unbelievably easily for me once I started prioritizing animal products again. But you talk about the bioavailability of the protein. Let's not even forget the essential amino acids that come along with eating meat, right? Anserine, taurine, creatine. Just yeah, I mean that space in the vegan world still makes me roll my eyes for sure. You can get all your protein from plants. And Ashley Van Houten, who's the muscle maven on Instagram,
Uh-huh.
and I always have a laugh about the vegan collagen. I mean, what is that? Where is that coming from?
Exactly. Like, I don't understand, sometimes how people really believe the things that they are told, this vegan, propaganda that they think somehow that, somebody once said, we're just working on two different platforms. It's like two different computer systems and they're just not compatible. And you can't introduce, this code into this system. It's just not going to run on a human system, this, plant code. So, I mean, it's just great. I'm so happy for you that you've really turned things around and it is so fantastic that you are now sharing this story. It is so important for people to just not fall prey to the propaganda, to then, not, as we said, double down on it when it starts to fail you, because I do believe that, like you said, you have this little honeymoon period with going plant-based because you've cut out processed meat foods. You've cut out, like seed oil fried chicken nuggets and things like that when you start to do plant based. But it's not the meat that's causing the health, it's not the removal of meat that's causing the health benefits that you see there in that honeymoon period. It's just the removal of a lot of junk. And really, the best thing for people, obviously, we know now, is to eat these animal based foods. So, thank you so much for sharing this story. I'm so happy that you're feeling so much better. You are so mellow, James. Like I just really enjoy talking with you. And I know that this mellow thing that you have, this vibe of mellowness, wasn't always there for you during this period of not eating meat. I mean, that shift alone, are your friends telling you, like, you're so much easier to get along with and things like that?
Not only friends, Linda, but family, especially. Like, wow, what a difference in you in terms of your mindset. I was constantly high strung. I was depressed, not much fun to be around. I remember when I was a kid, I was always the laugh of the party. I really was. I was always the jokester. People knew me for that. And then that all changed as I look back now and think about those last few years. I was really depressed and really anxious and really high strung. And the carnivore zen is real, my friends, because it kicks in. Your brain just goes, thank you. Your body goes, thank you. And I can tackle pretty much anything. I just mentioned to you off air, Linda, that I've started a new job this week. It's pretty stressful job. It's going to be a lot to do. And my first week, I was just like, man, let's get at it. Let's go. We're going to have a lot of fun doing this and just tackle one things one by one and just knock them down. If I had been doing that, if I'd have been doing that on my vegan diet, oh my goodness, I would have just collapsed in a bucket of tears somewhere, which happened quite often for me, by the way, when I was at my job as a vegan. I would excuse myself, end up crying because my hormones were all out of whack. And, even the Keith talks about it. But yeah, my mellow now is so much better.
I love it. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I'm enjoying the mellow. I love the mellow. So, thank you, James. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time. Please share with us where people can find you on YouTube, Instagram, your socials. Where can we find more about you?
Absolutely. And please forgive me, Linda. I'm just going to talk a little bit before I give people my socials on one last
Mhm.
subject I wanted to cover. And it goes back to what I was going to say is that if your diet is not serving you well, and please, I am not in any way bashing vegetarians or vegans here. I did what I thought was for all the right reasons. I just encourage you, as I did, to really look at how you're feeling. Experiment on yourself. Just see what works. I firmly believe now, Linda, that I plant my flag in a high animal foods, protein diet. If you need to supplement with some low oxalate fruits, do what works for you. The dogma that is in the vegan space and can sometimes creep into the carnivore space, Linda, as you know, especially with dropping your fat and going higher protein, there are tons of examples. And ultimately, it comes down to how you feel. Yes, always I advocate for test, don't guess. Go get your tests done to see how your inside is doing as well as your outside, even if you feel great. But start looking around. For me, with my health, it was obviously the way I felt. I was like, no, I feel like absolute garbage here. So this cannot be working for me. But when I started to interview people, excuse me, and look at things like it's the best for the environment, really do your due diligence and really look at that, especially in terms of regenerative agriculture, agriculture in general. Are these cows being wrongly vilified? The answer is yes. Things like cow farts are destroying the ozone. No. Look at how much our industry has changed to the point where all these fruits and vegetables that are in our grocery stores are there out of season. They're coming from all over the world. What do you think the impact on the environment is for all the transportation costs to get those there? Whereas if you buy from your local rancher, your meats, or your local grocery store, as you and I talked about, you're essentially doing so much better for the environment than if you're doing that vegan diet where the rows and rows of crops are being planted, monocropping that's destroying the topsoil, whereas regenerative agriculture is giving back to the soil and promoting life. Also, if you're thinking about the animals, the deaths with animals, as I said to you and Linda said to you earlier, go look and read at The Vegetarian Myth, even my interview that I did with Lier, two ex-vegans talking together. I mean, who would have thought? But there we go. Incidentally, my highest watched video on my channel, which I'll talk about in a sec, is the one with Lier, which is great. But she will tell you, and she does a far better job than me explaining why you have to understand when she did that. I listened to Lier earlier on, Linda, and when she said, if as a vegan you feel that there is no death on your plate, you are sadly mistaken,
You're absolutely
because
fooling yourself.
animals had to die to get the food that's on your plate now. And it really resonated with me, including her slug story in her garden, where she tried the devil to try to have no death. And she's like, it just can't be done. It's the cycle of nature. This is how we take from the earth and then give back to it when we die. And just look at our biology. If nothing else, look at our biology, the stomach pH that I talked about, the our digestive tract, how it mimics other meat eaters. And I say this to say, is just start asking questions if you're not feeling yourself. And thank you for that last piece. Folks, if you want to find out where I am on my social handles, you can see sort of right above me here on my backdrop. But I am on YouTube at _carnivorist. The same on everywhere else. Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I am on Spotify. So make sure you go check me out, and Apple Podcast as well. And thank you, Linda. It is always an honor to speak with you. And I hope we can reconnect soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate you so much sharing your story, sharing your advice. I think it is really important for people to understand those false narratives that can sometimes be so compelling. But then when you see the consequences of falling for those narratives, it can really help you make better decisions for your health. So I hope that people take that away from this conversation. James, it's been so much fun. And we're definitely going to do this again. So thank you.
Yes. This has to be an ongoing series, Linda.
I would love
The
it.
Carnitarian and the Carnivorist Connect or something like that, because I have a series with Monique, which is ongoing, and a few other people, but it would be such a treat to chat with you about some of these rabbit holes we talked about today. And
I feel like we've got more to discuss. Absolutely.
oh yeah,
Okay, great. All right. Well, that'll be it. We're going to put a pin in it, as you say. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, James. Thank you.
you too. Thanks, Linda.